You're in mute, sir.
Thank you for reminding that,
No,
Gonzalo.
please.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, Cloud Lunch and Learn session. Today we have a special guest from Argentina, Buenos Aires, right? Did I say it
Exactly.
correct? And we have
Yeah.
Gonzalo. He's actually working for Microsoft. He's involved in Microsoft Data Stack and has a years of experience in that. And we are going to have actually a very exciting session today. It's going to be about Azure SQL Managed Instance, and how to use that, where to use that. I believe migration is also going to be part of the topic. So that's it. Gonzalo, do you want to speak about yourself and the
Okay,
session?
sure. Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you very much, Elkan, for having me here. Honestly, it's a huge pleasure of sharing this time with you. Yes, as you mentioned before, we are going today to talk about Azure SQL MI, my favorite services, I would say, on
Hmm.
the Azure stack. We know that we have a huge number of services within Azure cloud, but honestly, this is my favorite, absolutely.
Great, that's great. So, as you know, guys and girls who are joining this, session, each time we try to bring you QCR code with the learning material. This one is about Azure SQL, as you see on your screens. So you may just screen this code, or you may type that URL under the Azure SQL here, https ak.ms, and you can get those modules. Okay, without any overdue, I want to give the stage back to Gonzalo so he can start sharing his presentation. So it's all yours, Gonzalo. Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I receive this particular question almost all the time. Every time that I mean, I speak with different managers that wants to migrate their databases to the cloud. I mean, it's like I know that this is a new name. I mean, this service has more or less 3 or 4 years, more or less. And every time that I want to present or introduce Azure SQL MI to my customers, I receive, hey, what is the difference between Azure SQL MI and SQL Server? I mean, is it a different SQL Server? Yes or no? It is the same. Do I have to modify my code or what? So I will answer this question during my presentation. First of all, I will introduce myself. I am Gonzalo Vicio. I am a data and AI specialist within Microsoft. I work with the entire data stack, all the services, Lakehouse, Databricks, machine learning, Power BI, the entire stack. But my major experience is about Azure SQL family, I would say, or SQL Server. You have my contact there, you have my email, my Twitter, everything. So if you want to reach out to me, because if I mean you have any question, just feel free to drop me an email or a message through Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. I will be more than happy to help. So let's do a quick introduction about this service. We know that we have different flavors on the Azure SQL family. We can choose different options based on our workload. Maybe we can choose, for example, VMs. The question is, hey, what can I choose and when? For example, you can choose VMs when you have, for example, features that are not supported on the other options, such as file stream or file tables. They are not supporting as of now. When, for example, you have a database which is bigger than 16 terabytes, which is the maximum size that Azure SQL MI allow. For Azure SQL database is 4 terabytes, but if you choose Azure SQL MI general purpose, you can have up to 16 terabytes. I will talk about that thing later. Or then, I mean, you can choose a VM. If you choose a VM, obviously you need to take care of patching the OS, patching the SQL Server, configure the security for the VM, firewall, among other things. If you choose a service, you need to know that we take care of almost all of the things for that service. Um, but well, today I'm going to cover MI. I'm not going to talk about Azure SQL Database. If you have any question, just let me know. Um, all of the options, at least on the service side, we have Azure SQL MI for the single or instance pool. I'm going to cover both in a few. Then you have the option for Azure SQL Database, single database, in where you have two options, or the famous DTUs or vCore options. You know that Azure SQL Database was one of the first services on the Azure Cloud Stack back in 2010, February 2010. And then you have the other option, which is Elastic Pool, which will be share the resources among different databases, etc., etc. I'm not going to talk that today. What to do for any options? I mentioned that. You have the slide if you want to check this. A different option, I mean, every time I speak with more and more customers following the hybrid model of their infrastructure. But let's say that you bought a bunch of hardware, the hardware is new, and you want to use, for example, Azure SQL MI on your data center. What can you do? Well, one of the options is to use Azure Arc, meaning that the software, the Azure software itself, will be installed on your hardware. One of the options that it is available is Azure SQL MI. So in case that you want to use this service on your hardware, on your data center, you can use Azure Arc, which is built on top of Kubernetes. But in case that you want to use Azure SQL MI on your data center, well, you can use this. It's a very good option in case that you want to use this on your data center. Let's talk about service tiers. When I explain service tier, think about that you are choosing the whole package. Let's say that you want to configure a VM. Normally, you think, whenever you have your on-premises data center, you have, for example, the storage, you have the virtualization, hardware, and software, for example, I don't know, Bing or whatever technology that you are using. You are thinking of vCores, you are thinking of storage, you are thinking of memory. Well, here, all of those words means that you are choosing a service tier. Every time that you choose service tier, you are choosing a CPU model, you are choosing memory, you are choosing IOPS, you are choosing storage. It is exactly the same. So what are the difference between them, between general purpose and business critical? Let's say that you want to build or you create a service and you say, okay, why should I choose general purpose? Why should I choose business critical? What are the difference between them? One of the huge differences is that if you choose general purpose, you are using remote storage. You are using remote storage account and blob storage in order to host your files, meaning that you will have more latency than business critical, because business critical has the storage attached directly to the nodes or the VMs that are used in the service. That is one of the differences. So you will have best performance in business critical rather than general purpose. I know that the cost play a very important role here. I know that business critical, you will have more cost. That is the real truth. But the thing is, you will have better performance. The other difference is that I'm going to explain it later. By default, you have a service. One of your questions can be, hey, how are you protecting the service? How do you ensure that the service will be up all the time? So in general purpose, the internal high availability is based on, we are going to see this in a few slides after. You will see that internal high availability for general purpose is that you have a passive nodes pool. So every time that something happens to the active node, automatically there will be a failover, or there will be a movement from Azure Service Fabric from this passive node to the active nodes. That will be a failover. That will be downtime, yes, but it will be a couple of seconds. On the other hand, for the business critical, you have availability group. So behind bars, you have an availability group of 4 nodes. If something happens to the actual primary, there will be an automatic failover on the same region, on the same zone. As of now, multi-zone is not available. It will be soon. And that's it. There are other differences in TMDB, among other things, but the most important are those. Important thing, what are the differences? We spoke a little bit about this at the very beginning, but what are the differences between Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL MI? What are the differences between them? Why should I choose Azure SQL MI over Azure SQL Database? From my point of view, one of the very critical differences between them is this little guy here. native backup and restore. So let's say that you have your SQL Server on-prem, your SQL Server in infrastructure as a service, that can be Amazon, Google, Azure, whenever you have your SQL Server installation. One of the key advantages of Azure SQL MI over Azure SQL Database is that you will be able to back up and restore your database, the source database. So in case that you're using SQL Server on-prem or IaaS, you can back up the database and restore it directly to Azure SQL MI. Boom, that's it. One of your questions can be, okay, hey, what will happen if I don't like Azure SQL MI and I want to return to on-premises? What can I do? Well, in SQL 2022, one of the announcements was that backup and restore from Azure SQL MI to SQL Server will be supported. So you will be able to do the rollback, which is amazing. Another thing or another difference is that, for example, let's say that you have an application which is using more than one database and you want to execute cross-database queries between them. So is that supported here? The answer is yes. You will be able to execute cross-database queries and transactions. And now between different Azure SQL MI, we distribute transactions. But in Azure SQL Database, you can do that, but you need an external service. External service means more effort on your migration, and sometimes you don't have time to do more efforts in order to make your application work in Azure SQL Database. So here you just backup, restore the database, boom, that's it. There are some other things. You will have, for example, service broker, extended events, database mail, jobs. For example, hey, I have an application that it is using SQL jobs. Will that work in Azure SQL MI? The answer is yes, that will work, among other things. We talk about migrations. We talk about, hey, what will happen if, what will happen if that, what will happen. So one of the good things is that Azure SQL MI is almost 100% compatible with the SQL Server, the native one. If you want to migrate, you will be able to migrate from 2005 up to 2019. So important thing, if you migrate from an older version to a newer version, do you have to do anything? The answer is no. You can back up and restore. One of the important things in order to have the latest features is to change the compatibility level. So if you migrate your system, if you move your system from an older version to a newer or to Azure SQL MI, change the compatibility level, because otherwise you will not be using the latest features. Because, for example, there are some features that are being tested first in Azure SQL MI, and then they are moved to the regular SQL Server in on-premise. So always remember to change the compatibility level. Another very important thing is that, hey, this is a service, so you are maintaining it. For example, for the CheckDB, hey, what will happen if I execute a CheckDB and I found an issue? Well, you have to open a ticket because that is our responsibility. But what will happen with the database maintenance? Do I have to maintain it? The answer is yes. Why? Because, I mean, in Azure SQL MI is the newest SQL Server version. It will be updated first in Azure SQL MI, and then that will be released to SQL Server on premises. We are testing new features in Azure SQL MI, but for the index maintenance, the statistics maintenance, you will have to execute your regular maintenance. So don't forget to enable it. I saw a bunch of issues, a bunch of incidents, a bunch of critic situation here in Microsoft because the maintenance was not in place. Will out-update statistics work here? The answer is yes. But what do you do today in on-premises or in infrastructure as a service? Do you maintain your indexes? Do you maintain your statistics? Your answer will probably yes. Will here you will have to do the same. So don't forget to do that. This is just an advice. Other thing, security. One of the amazing things is that by default, Azure SQL MI use VNets behind bars to connect the service. That means that in order to connect to the service, you will have or to build your entire ecosystem on the same VNet with different subnets, or you will have to connect to this service using, I don't know, VPN gateways or VNet peerings, or you will have to use connection, at least with VPN site to site or an express route, you will not be able to connect to Azure SQL MI by default through internet. Can you enable a public endpoint? The answer is yes. Is that a best practice? The answer is no. By default, this is your database. The database must not have any internet access allowed. So be careful with that. But by default, this will be closed. So just pay attention and be careful if you are connecting your application, your ETLs or ELTs, your reports from outside Azure or from outside the VNet in where Azure SQL MI is, because you will have to connect them. Because by default, as I mentioned, this will be a VNet by default in Azure SQL MI. I spoke about how to connect. I spoke about, okay, hey, I mean, how can we enable the connectivity between the source and Azure SQL MI? The other thing will be, hey, how will we authenticate to the service? Can we use Windows authentication? The answer as of now is yes, but it is in preview. Windows authentication option is in preview. I left the link in where you can check where is the state of this particular improvement. As of now in GA, you can connect using SQL authentication or Azure Active authentication. Simple. If your application is using Windows authentication, you need to do some changes in order to enable Service Principal to use Windows authentication. But as of now, as I mentioned in GA SQL and Azure Active Directory authentication. The VNet, the things that I mentioned before. So now, more information about the difference between the general purpose, business critical, very important in case that you have a system that, for example, is creating different databases for each different customer. So be careful, because the maximum number as of today of databases supported in Azure SQL MI is 100. You cannot create more than 100 databases in Azure SQL MI as of today. That will change. As of now, that is the limit, so be careful with that. Besides, you have other limits, for example, the maximum number of database files. We are going to cover the data file size in a few. What are the limits? Because today in Business Critical, we have public preview of 16 terabyte in a particular series of hardware series inside the Business Critical tier. By default in GA is 4 terabytes for Business Critical. For general purpose is 16 terabytes in case that you have a bigger database. Number of IOPS, etc., etc. One important thing that I think, yes, that I am going to cover this is that we as DBAs, we care about the number of IOPS inside our system. Why? Because based on that, we know, or we will know how much IOPS we will need. But what will happen in general purpose that it is not happening in business critical? By default, the number of IOPS depends in business critical with the number of vCores that we choose. So depending of the number of vCores is the number of IOPS that we will receive. What will happen in general purpose? Well, that limit depends on the size of each of the database files. So if my file, that can be data, that can be log, has a size of obviously greater than 0, but less than 128, by default, you will receive this number of IOPS per file. Important thing, data and log. What will be the problem here? By default, you allocate a fixed number of storage for your service. That can be, I don't know, 64 gigabyte, 128, 512, whatever. Obviously, the size of that storage allocated to the service itself will not take care of the number of IOPS. The number of IOPS, as I mentioned, will depend on the size of each database file. So if you're having, for example, a bunch of IO waits, page IO latch, or waiting for write log, or for example, IO completion, those kind of waits are related to IOPS. So if you want to increase the jobs inside your database, you will have to increase your database file size. So be careful with that. Another advice. Backups are automated. The responsibility are for Microsoft. So those backups will occur every 5 to 10 minutes. Can I check that? The answer is yes. Some weeks ago, there was an announcement, an improvement that we will be able to execute. This is in Azure SQL Database, not yet in Azure SQL MI, in order to get the latest backups, in order to see the full history of backups. As of now, here you will be able to use extended events. You will be able to use the Azure SQL MI error log in order to see whether the backups are happening or not. But that is our responsibility. You don't need to care about the backups. In case that you want to restore, you can use the portal, you can use the PowerShell, you can use APIs, etc., etc., etc. Gonzalo, you know that I have a legal requirement. I know based on what I saw on the links, I know that the maximum retention is 35 days, which is the maximum, and the minimum is 1 day. But I need to retain more than 35 days. What can I do? Well, you can enable something called long-term backup retention in order to save up to 10 years your backups. Obviously, this will have extra cost, but at least you have the option to save the backups for more than 35 days. Let's say that you have another legal requirement, which is, hey, I need to save my backups in my country because I need to save a copy because we have a legal requirement. What can I do? Well, you can configure a blob storage or storage account in order to execute the backups, because you can execute the backups. You can use the same sentence, backup database to URL, blah, blah, boom, that's it. You will execute the backup to blob storage. And then you can download it from there using ACID copy, using Storage Explorer, or whatever tool you use to manage file between your own premises and Azure. Things that happened to me in the past. Replication, I know that there are a bunch of people who loves replication. Can you use replication? The answer is yes, you can use replication. You can use replication as publisher, distributor, subscriptor, everything. Or a subscriber, sorry. But hey, Gonzalo, you know, I am using data sync in order to do this synchronization. Will that work? The answer is no. For data sync, Azure SQL MI as of now is not supported. But replication it is. Gonzalo, I am seeing that on the site, replication is in preview. Is that correct? The answer is yes. It is not yet in GA. When? I don't know, honestly. That is a question that I see almost every week inside our DLs, honestly. Service Broker is supported partially, database made in case that you have it. One of the advantages of the cloud, I would say, is that, hey, I need more power. I need more resources because, for example, today we have a very important day and we need to add more resources to our service. Can we do that? The answer is yes. How long will this take? Well, here's the thing. By default, building an Azure SQL MI will take between 3 to 6 hours today. What will happen if we add, for example, more storage? Well, that will take between 5 to 10 minutes, honestly. That will be fast. What will happen if you want to change from general purpose to business critical? Can you do that? The answer is yes. Can you roll back that? The answer is yes as well. But that will take time. The same time that will take to build a new Azure SQL MI, between 3 to 6 hours. If you want to increase the number of records, the same, because you are building a new architecture and you are copying everything, and then there will be a failover. That will take time. So my recommendation, first of all, test this process in a lower environment for how long this will take. If you can, let's say that you're going to use 4 cores, try to start with 8 in case that, hey, I didn't know we have a huge amount of requests from our service. We needed more. That is why I prefer to start in a high level. Obviously, that will depend of cost. I know that. But be careful because sometimes scaling up the resources will take time. I am not seeing questions, so I will continue. If you see any questions, just let me know. or interrupt me whenever you want or need. I don't have any problem.
Yeah, so far, Gonzalo, there is no questions, but I'm monitoring that. So, but thank you for reminding, and thank you for putting some questions while speaking
Yes,
about
all
that.
the time.
And I
Absolutely.
will give like general question to you. Probably you heard that question a lot. Is like with SQL instances, Azure SQL instance managed as well. You have this EDTU, DTU. There's like pools, like sharing the pool and stuff like that. Are you going to talk about them, kind of to give good understanding in terms of how how as an infrastructure person they can plan on what's the DTU requirement that they need to have in place? Thanks.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I mean, those three letters drove me crazy, honestly, majority of the time that I was using Azure SQL Database until the Vcore mode appeared. The good thing here in Azure SQL MI is that we don't have DTUs, we just have Vcores. Sometimes it's, hey, how can I calculate how many cores will I need? Because, for example, in my on-premises system, I have 10 databases, but I am going to migrate a single one. We want to break this monolithic architecture. We want to move a single database, so I want to calculate how many vectors will I need. Well, you can use that data migration assistant in order to take a photo of your workload, and then you can see the recommendation, or you can use the database experimentation and assistant in order to take a picture or take a photo of your workload or take a baseline in order to execute it through an Azure SQL MI and see whether what is the result. On the other part, we have here, for example, instance pool. In Azure SQL Database, we have Elastic Pool. It is exactly the same. We are sharing resources among different, on this case, services in Azure SQL databases. So let's say that you want to pay for a single Azure SQL MI, but internally you want to have multiple. Why? Because let's say that you are in a development environment. You want to share because you don't care about having exactly the same resources that you have in prod, because you have another environment which is QA or test or whatever you have. But this is for development. That's it. Well, what you can do is just to use this feature called instance pools, in where you pay for a single 16 vCore managed instance. This is just an example. But internally, you can split them in different Azure SQL MIs, so different applications pay for a single vCore, I would say, Azure SQL MI, but internally they are using multiple. This is amazing in case that you want to share resources among different services. Um, and other important things, limitation, known issues, some trace flags. I mean, I love trace flags. Trace flags change the behavior of the engine or the database engine. By default, SQL Server will do a bunch of things. You can choose to change some of them. We have the roadmap. Hey, what are the things that are coming? You have the link. Oops, I just touched. Sorry, I just touched the link. My bad. Very important question. I hear this every single day. How to save cost in the cloud? So we are using Azure SQL MI. What can we do? Because we want to reduce the number. We have two ways. One is to use the famous Azure Hybrid benefit, in where you can use your existing licenses, SQL Server licenses, in order to save the license cost that it is embedded on your service. Because by default, you are going to pay a number. Inside that number, you have the resources plus the licensing. So if you want to reduce or if you want to eliminate the cost that it is associated to the license thing, you can use your existing licenses. What can you do? For example, let's say that you are migrating an existing SQL Server from on-premises or from infrastructure as a service to Azure SQL MI. Can you use this benefit? The answer is yes, because you are migrating that system from on-premises, from infrastructure as a service to Azure SQL MI. Automatically, when you create Azure SQL MI, you can click Enable Azure Hybrid Benefit, and that's it. What will happen if you have an existing Azure SQL MI, which was not migrated, which is a new service? What can you do? In case that you have enough licenses in order to apply the benefit, you will be able to do that. Here you have the link for the hybrid benefit calculator link, in where you will see, hey, my Azure SQL MI, for example, here, I am migrating. I will choose SQL Managed Instance option. Here you will see, for example, how many licenses do I have available in my volume licensing center site. For example, I want to use, obviously by default is Gen 5 because Gen 4 was deprecated. I want to use 8 cores, for example. And the thing is, I'm going to use general purpose. What can I do? How many licenses will I need in order to enable this benefit? Well, here you have some information. What is the ratio? For example, I am going to use an enterprise edition license. Okay, how many cores I will be able to use in Azure SQL MI? Well, the ratio is that you will have up to 4 general purpose vCores or 1 business critical vCore. So if I use 4 business critical vCore, how many licenses do I need? Well, at least 4 for enterprise edition. And here you have the calculator in order to see, hey, if I want to enable this, how many licenses do I have? Well, you can use this site and automatically see how many licenses you will need in order to enable the benefit. For general purpose and business critical, it is exactly the same. How much you can save? Up to 55%. You will see on the portal. I will show you this in a few. The other thing that you can use is, okay, Gonzalo, I saw and I don't have available licenses in order to enable the hybrid benefit. What can I do? Well, the other thing that you can use is something which is called Reserved Instances, meaning that you will be committing to use Azure SQL MI 1 or 3 years. You say, hey, inside my subscription, I will have an Azure SQL MI with 8 cores. So the system automatically will see this on your subscription and it will say, hey, yes, I saw an Azure SQL MI from 8 cores. I will apply automatically the discount on your subscription. But Gonzalo, wait, I have more than one Azure SQL MI and I want to receive more than one. Can you do that? The answer is yes. You can consume the cores and do a reservation for all of those cores. So the discount will apply for the number of cores that you have on your subscription. But Gonzalo, I enable a reservation, but I don't have the instance. Well, the discount will not apply. Oh, that's it. Simple. So for cost, as I mentioned, Azure SQL Hybrid Benefit and the reservations. High availability, I think that I spoke a little bit about the internal high availability at the very beginning. Here at least we have a slide. As I mentioned, for general purpose, we have these redundant nodes. Here we have Azure Service Fabric, which will be checking the health of all of the time for the active nodes. Hey, something happened here, and this service itself will move this node from here to the active pool. And as I mentioned, you will have a little downtime because of this failover. What will happen on the business critical? Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we will have an availability group, 4 nodes, same region, same zone. In the future, the multi-zone feature will be enabled here in Azure SQL MI. Can we offload our reads from the primary to the secondary? The answer is yes. You can move automatically read operations from the primary to the secondary with no extra cost. You just need to use application intent read only and initial catalog equals to database name, and automatically the connection will be moved to here. which is great because this is by default and you don't need to do anything. And then there is another feature which is called auto failover groups, which will allows you to have an Azure SQL MI in one region and an Azure SQL MI on the secondary region. Let's say that you, by legal requirement, by business requirement, you need to protect your system from a region outage. What can you do? Well, here you can use something called auto failover group, in which I speak in another session, which is called HIDR business, HIDR ensuring business continuity. I will not cover a lot of things, just the concept, in order to see that, hey, I need to protect my my system because of a region outage. Well, you can use this. I don't think that we have questions. News. Well, soon we will have the build, the Microsoft build. So I think that we will have more news there. But as of now, very important, we have SQL 2022, which is now in private preview. I think that it will be in public preview by mid-year, more or less. But what are the important things? The most important to me is that we will have this little guy here, this bidirectional HADR, in where we will be able to connect an on-premises database or SQL server or an infrastructure as a service SQL server with Azure SQL MI. So we will combine the regular SQL server with Azure SQL MI, and you will have a near real-time, almost real-time replication from one to another. Or in case that you want to migrate your system, you will be able to do that. As of today, this is enabled in public preview, SQL 2022 and SQL 2019 CU15. So in case that you have enterprise or developer, SQL 2019 with CU15, you will be able to configure this. It's very simple, honestly. I will show you in a few how to do that. But this is one of the amazing announcements. The other one is one that I mentioned before regarding backing up and restoring it from Azure SQL MI to the regular SQL Server on premises or IaaS. We have other announcements, but they are more related to SQL 2022 rather than Azure SQL MI. This one is the link, the DR in the cloud, in where you will be able to connect your regular SQL to Azure SQL MI. We use behind barrier technology of distributed availability group. This was introduced in SQL 2016. Defender for SQL. New hardware series. This was another announcement in where, because, here's the thing. I know that a bunch of customers, for example, use 8 B cores or 16 B cores and 256 gigabytes of memory. Can we choose memory today in Azure SQL MI? The answer is no. By default, you have a fixed number of memory. How much? Well, for example, today on our standard series, which is the one that we have for by default, which is Gen 5, we have 5.1 gigabyte of memory per beacon. This is the maximum. What will happen on the new hardware series? We will have a higher ratio and more memory for each of the service. Let's say that you need more memory. On this new hardware series, you will have more memory and you will have a newer, obviously, CPU model, which are on latest version of the Intel processors. So this is not only more memory, this is also a better CPU hardware. But both of them are in preview. They are not yet in GA. You can choose them, but the important thing is that you need to know that both are in preview. Parallel backup, some of the internal changes, some other announcement you have here. You will see the links. You can check them. You can see the information. And now let's go to the demo. and I am not seeing questions, so I will continue.
Yeah, so far there is no questions. And before
Okay.
you start, Gonzalo, you
Yep.
know, the demo, quick question here. So because you mentioned like in preview and GA, so can
Yep.
you explain to the viewers what are the limitations when the service is in preview and what's the best use case there so that everybody's clear on that? Thanks.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Every time that a feature is in preview, that can be, first of all, that it is not enabled in all of the regions. Sometimes because of hardware that I mean, it is not yet ready on all of the regions. Another thing is that that can public preview means that the service can change or the feature can change. That is why it's in public preview and it is not yet in GA. But I mention this all the time because there are some customers or companies that has internally some limitations on, hey, if the feature is not in GA, you cannot create it. You cannot use it as, I would say, beta state, because that can change, that can I don't know, provoke incidents or whatever. um, Sometimes I use some public preview features, at least in Azure SQL MI. I use transactional replication with no issues. But before using any public preview feature, honestly, what I did in the past was to ask to the PG team, hey, are you going to support me? Yes or no? And that's it. Because sometimes you receive, hey, this is in public preview, you don't have support. Well, the answer is no. But at least I received the confirmation before enable it. And that's it. There are not too much differences.
Great. Thank you for clarifying
Sure,
that.
no problem.
Mhm.
So we have the portal, we have Azure SQL MI. Let's create it. So this is very simple, honestly. You choose the resource group, you choose the name, then you choose the region. Azure SQL MI is available in all of the regions. Then you configure what I call the service tier at the very beginning. As you can see here, we have general purpose, we have business critical. As I mentioned in GA, here we have 16 and 4 terabytes. Here, the hardware generation, we have the current one and we have the new one. Here we have 7 gigabytes of memory, as you can see, and here we have 5.1. The space that you can choose, the vCores, then here you have the hybrid benefit. You can apply this, and that's it. For example, what happens if you create an Azure SQL MI and then you want to enable this benefit? Can you do that? The answer is yes. And this will not have any downtime. So you can enable whenever you want. And the backup storage redundancy. What is the difference between geo and locally? Well, for example, if the entire region is down, you will not be able to restore this backup from one region to another one. If you choose this one, yes, you will be able to restore the backups in a different regions. That is why you have the geo redundant option. You click apply. Then you have the authentication method. You can use only SQL authentication, you can use Active Directory authentication, or you can use both. Here you choose what we say SA for the regular SQL Server. This one will be exactly the same. Gonzalo, let's say. A password, and then let's choose networking. You can use your own VNet or you can use a new one. Public endpoint. This one is what I say, hey, be careful. If you enable this, it means that your service will be open to internet. So be careful. And then you have TLS here. This one it is because if your application doesn't support 1.2, you can use older versions. Is it recommended? The answer is no. Obviously, try to use the latest TLS version because of security, but I know that there are legacy applications which doesn't support 1.2. Well, in case that you need, you can use 1.0 or 1.1. Security, you have Defender. You will see security recommendations, etc., etc. You can enable this, but this one will have extra costs, so be careful with that. Manage identity, etc., etc. TDE, I mean, by default, TDE is enabled always. What can you do? By default, TDE will be encrypted with a Microsoft key. Everything will be managed by Microsoft. But let's say that you want to create your own TDE key. Can you do that? The answer is yes. You can create your own key. You can use an Azure keyboard, or you can use your own key. There are some HSM devices that will give you some keys that you can apply to the service. Be careful to lose them, because otherwise you will lose everything. But you can change that. Let's click accept. Additional settings. Let's say that you have a different collection today in on-premises or IaaS. Can you change this? The answer is yes. What will happen if you choose or if you use a different collection? Well, if you are executing queries against your 10DB, maybe you get issues or errors, and you will have to use the collate clause in order to fix them, or blah, 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 change the collection, etc., etc. The important thing is, can you change this? The answer is yes. You can change the time zone depending on where you are. Out of failover group, I already mentioned this. Maintenance window, you can change it. In case that Microsoft needs to apply patches to your system, you will be able to choose the window. Tags, majority of the customers are using these tags, for example, to say, hey, who is the owner of this service? Owner, or for example, the cost collector, or I don't know, the owner mail, the etc., etc., etc. In case that you want to use your own script in order to collect all the information from your Azure SQL MI, well, you can use this, review and create, boom, this will start. How long this will take, I already mentioned this, between 3 to 6 hours, and then you will see this. Boom, everything is created. Important. What is the host name that you will use to connect? This one, host. This one is the endpoint that you will have to use from your application, from your management studio, or whatever you are using. You will have to use that one. Then here you will have, again, when you want to scale up, scale down, apply hybrid benefit, well, you will have to see it here. There are other things, but the most important things are those ones. Then you have Defender, networking, logs, metrics. I mean, if you want to see, for example, hey, I don't know, let's see for CPU consume maximum. If you want to see, for example, how much CPU or your service is consuming, you can use this metric. You can use scripts. You can use, for example, for event management, you can use a SCOM or System Center in order to monitor your service. You can use Azure Monitor and SQL Insight module if you want. Or you can enable logs and log analytics in order to see information about your service, alerts, among other things. I don't know. Yes, I didn't do any. I mean, I am not using this one a lot, so I will not see this. So then, how can I connect to the service itself? Well, I can use Management Studio. I can use, always try to use the latest version. I am using here 18.11.1 because I was testing before the Azure SQL MI link, and you need the latest Azure SQL, the latest Management Studio version. Let me show you that here I am using SQL 2019 CU15, and if I want to use the Azure SQL MI link, you just need to come here, and then Azure SQL MI link and replicate database. And you will be able to replicate the database. But if you want to migrate your database, you can use the failover database task in order to execute the failover. It's very simple, honestly. You will see that when you are replicating the database, you will see that here a distribute availability group will be created. And then you will be able to see the dashboard in order to see the synchronization status. And that's it. As you can see, it's synchronizing. Everything is fine. I need to log in. That will take some time, but at least I wanted to show you that you can do that. You can see this information on the MI link. But let me show you other things. For example, right-click properties. You will see the information, the memory, the number of records here, the service tier, collation. What are the things that you can change? Well, for example, you can change the cost threshold, you can change the max TOP, you can change the optimize for other workloads. Yes, sorry.
Hey Gonzalo, we have a question,
Yeah.
so I want to bring that up on the
Sure, thank
studio.
you.
So it came from Ashish, and is there a way to restore point in time backup to a different subscription?
Yes, I did. Yep.
So is this a feature that you can do both on general Azure SQL and as well as Azure SQL MI, or what is?
Yes, because you are restoring.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. I have a single subscription. Sorry, I don't have more than one because this one is the one that Microsoft gives me. But you can, for example, search for managed databases. Let me see because I think that I have. Let me see. And here you can choose the subscription. For example, let me do this slower. Sorry. So you search for managed databases, and then when you come here, you will see all of the databases. You click the database that you want to restore. You search for the subscription, and then resource group, the database name, and the MI that you want to restore. You click preview and create. Boom. That's it.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. And I think that I don't have too much time. And then I mentioned to change the compatibility level, that is very important. You can just come here and say, hey, I want to change them and use another one. Or for example, I saw that SQL 2022 will use compatibility level 160. Can I change that? The answer is yes. Will the new features impact here? The answer is no. You can do alter database, Germany, set compatibility level equal 160. Boom. This will work. This one is SQL 2022. But obviously the features are not there yet. They will be soon. And now if I do the same, since I don't have, since this Management Studio version doesn't support that compatibility level, you will see this clear. But if I do this, select from CS databases, you will see 160. But the features are not enabled yet. So let me see your thing. Do you want to modify the auto row? Can you do that? The answer is yes. Can you use partitioning? The answer is yes. You can use partitioning in case that your application is using partitioning. You will be able to do that. I don't know what else. Well, replication management. In case of, here you will see the logs. Hey, something is going on. I want to check the logs. You can use this. Besides, you can use Resource Governor. It's enabled here in Azure SQL MI. The Resource Governor feature allows you to, I would say, to distribute the resources in case that you want to restrict resources to a specific set of users, because you know that, for example, you are using a single Azure SQL MI, you know that the BI team is executing their reports directly on your system, you want to control this, you want to limit the resources that the BI team is using, well, you can use resource governance. And that's
Or
it.
yeah, we have one more question for from
Sure.
Ashish here, Gonzalo. So question
Sure.
is, do we need to perform DBCC checks on SQL MI?
Do we need? I mean,
I
the,
mean,
the
what's
answer
the
is
basically the probably the question is more about best practice. What
best
should we
practices. Yes. I mean, do you need to maintain your index? Absolutely. Yes. That is one of the recommendation. Index is statistics. The answer is yes, you must. For the check DB, honestly, you can do that once a week, once every 15 days. I would recommend to do that, yes, just in case, just to be sure that everything is fine. If you find any issue, just open a ticket. But the answer is yes.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
And that's it. I think that I am almost on the time. If there are no more questions, thank you, honestly. Thank you, welcome for having me here. Honestly, it was a pleasure. If you receive any other question, just forward it to me. Otherwise, you have my contact. I will send you the slides so you
Hmm.
can put it on your
Sure.
site. And that's it.
So yeah, if you can just put the slides somewhere like in GitHub with the links, because your slides had really useful links there, helpful links, while you
Sure.
were demonstrating the capabilities and plus, different scenarios where to use what type of feature, right, and how to estimate the vCores and stuff like that. I believe these are very important points, when somebody is trying to plan the migration in addition to database migration tool, Azure database migration tool that's there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I will just share here before, as you heard actually from Gonzalo, you'll actually be here for another couple of minutes, and if you have any questions, please put that in the chat. Gonzalo would be glad to take them and and give the answers. Meanwhile, I'm going to share this Cloud Launch and Learn QCR code, where you can get and free resources to learn step by step about Azure SQL. And you have the QCR and as well as link here. All right. Okay, guys. I would like to thank again here Gonzalo for being our guest and sharing all these details, operational details, and from his experience, right? Because it was not just describing the product, but also giving the best features and usage scenarios. And thank you for being here. Thank you everyone for watching this. And I believe Gonzalo, you will have another session, correct?
Yes, I have an
Mm-hmm.
HADR session, which I cover specifically high availability.
Okay, so you heard that. So if you want to learn more about high availability, check out the Azure Dublin, the Cloud Lunch and Learn meetup, and register for that. All right, thank you everyone. Thank you Gonzalo
Thank
for
you.
excellent, presentation, and take care. Thank you everyone for watching and being here. Thanks.
Bye
Bye for
bye.
now.
Thank you, guys.
Mhm.